Legends say cruelty travels farther than any army, and even the punishments attributed to Genghis Khan left shadows long after his empire turned to dust. Some claimed the Mongol ruler invented a punishment so silent, so merciless, that it echoed across continents. But the truth is simpler and darker. Men who needed a monster borrowed his name, and centuries later, in England's plague years, that borrowed cruelty found its next victim. The winter fog hung low over the village near Essex, a pale shroud sliding between cottages as if the land itself tried to smother what breathed upon it. Plague bells tolled with a dull, hollow sorrow, and rats scurried beneath broken thatched roofs, their small feet scratching against wet timber like whispers of a coming doom. Mothers kept children indoors, fathers watched the woods with suspicion, and every evening smoke from funeral pyres rose in thin, trembling threads. Beneath all this drifted a rumor, the kind carried softly but believed fiercely, that a foreign punishment had reached England, something called the Mongol silence, a cruelty said to crush the soul without shedding a drop of blood. No one knew its origin, but the witch hunters, eager to find meaning in fear, spoke of it reverently. In the heart of the village lived Eleanor Hart, a healer whose hands had saved more lives than the local clergy would ever admit. She tended to sick children, brewed poultices for festering wounds, and sat awake through nights comforting mothers who prayed their babies would survive until dawn. Her knowledge, drawn from herbs and whispered remedies her own mother once taught her, both comforted and frightened the villagers. They relied on her, but loyalty fades quickly in times of plague. And always, watching her from behind church windows, stood the clergy, their eyes narrowed, their whispers sharp. The turning point arrived with a traveling cleric whose robes smelled of damp earth and whose gaze flickered with a feverish intensity. He carried with him a weather-stained scroll wrapped in fraying silk. Claiming it had come from far eastern lands, he presented it to the local magistrate as a relic of truth, an account of Genghis Khan's punishment for disobedient women. The parchment, cracked and smudged with age, described a torment of isolation, starvation, and public humiliation. There was no proof it was authentic, but proof mattered little to men who found purpose in fear. The magistrate, hunched and hungry for authority, seized upon the scroll with trembling hands. Here, he declared, lay divine confirmation that knowledge in the hands of women invited ruin. The scroll became his weapon, and its supposed Mongol origins, hardly understood, entirely misunderstood, made it all the more potent. Women with hidden knowledge must be broken, he proclaimed, before they destroy the community. And so the legend of a foreign punishment, perhaps forged by an Englishman's ink rather than Mongol law, slithered into their justice. It took only one death to ignite the fire. A small boy Eleanor had treated, his fever already too advanced for any cure, passed away during the night. Grief turned quickly to suspicion. His mother, shaking with sorrow, whispered that his skin had turned strange after drinking Eleanor's herbs. Neighbors repeated her words, twisting them with every breath. Soon the village square buzzed with claims that her remedies were not Christian, that her knowledge was too strange, too foreign. Someone muttered that her healing plants came from Mongol law, and that alone was enough to ruin her. When the magistrate stepped forward with the scroll in his hand, declaring Eleanor a danger, the crowd did not resist. The clergy nodded solemnly, as though confirming what they had long believed. That night, as rain lashed the roofs and wind battered the old oak by the church, soldiers pushed open Eleanor's door. They dragged her through the mud, her long skirts ripping against stones. Her daughter, 8-year-old Anne, woke to the chaos and saw her mother pulled away, her cry swallowed by the storm. Through the tiny window, lit by a single candle, Anne pressed her hands to the glass as the darkness carried her mother into the stone jail behind the church. The punishment, the magistrate insisted, would follow the Mongol decree described in the scroll: silence, isolation, and the breaking of the will. But no such decree had ever existed beyond the imagination of fearful men. Still, Eleanor was thrust into a narrow iron confinement box barely wide enough for her body. Her knees folded beneath her on cold stone, her back hunched painfully, her breath condensed in small clouds against the metal walls. Hours passed, then days. The jail echoed with distant chanting as clergy recited prayers outside her cell, urging God to purge her of darkness. Rats crept along the edges of the box, their teeth scraping the iron as they searched for warmth. One night, a rat slipped inside through a gap near the hinge. Its cold paws touched her ankle. She flinched but could not move away. Blood from a small cut on her foot drew the creature closer, and it licked the wound with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Eleanor endured, whispering into the blackness, "This is not Genghis Khan's cruelty, it is theirs." Food arrived rarely, water even less. Sometimes she fainted, slumping forward against the iron walls. Sometimes she remained awake, listening to the distant cries of other prisoners, a man coughing until silence consumed him, a woman begging for mercy, a child sobbing for her mother. Each voice was a reminder of a world slipping further out of reach. Outside, the officials began altering records, removing Eleanor's name from lists of healers, replacing her contributions with vague accusations. The magistrate ordered that any mention of her cures be destroyed. The clergy burned scraps of parchment containing her recipes, her notes, her knowledge. They sought to make her vanish, not just in body, but in history. By the time Eleanor's voice finally fell silent within the iron box, the village had already begun to forget she existed. Her daughter, standing at the edge of the churchyard, waited each evening for the door to open and for her mother to emerge. But the door never opened, and somewhere in the jail, shrouded in darkness and erased from memory, Eleanor Hart took her place among the ghosts of forgotten women, victims not of Mongol cruelty, but of England's own fearful imagination. Fear crosses oceans long before ships do. It hides in the folds of memory, drifting like invisible smoke from one land to another. The punishments men invent in panic become stories, and those stories become weapons. What began as a lie in England, wrapped in the name of a Mongol conqueror, found its way across the Atlantic, settling into the cold soil of a new world ready to believe anything that justified its trembling. Winter in Salem arrived like a living thing. Sharp enough to draw blood from the sky, winds screamed between leafless trees, their branches clawing at the grey heavens. Snow gathered in uneven drifts along the narrow paths that wound through the village, and each creaking wooden house seemed to shake with more superstition than cold. Shadows from candlelit windows stretched long across the snow, as if the buildings themselves feared the darkness waiting beyond their doors. The villagers whispered constantly. They spoke of Eastern tortures once used by English witch hunters, cruelties older than scripture, brought from distant lands they barely understood. They said those punishments were returning, carried by spirits of the dead or perhaps by the very judges who once had served in England's darkest hours. In taverns and at hearths, people leaned closer, lowering their voices, their eyes flicking toward the woods as if expecting specters to emerge. In the center of these rumors lived Martha Hale, a midwife with calm eyes and steady hands. She had delivered half the village's children, yet trust was fragile in Salem. A single tremor of uncertainty could shatter it. Martha carried a quiet sorrow. Her grandmother had vanished in England during the plague years, swallowed by a punishment no one would explain. Martha knew little beyond the whispers her mother carried across the sea. Still, she grew up sensing that her family had left behind more than land. They'd escaped a shadow that refused to die. Martha kept a single heirloom hidden beneath the loose boards of her bedroom floor, a small carved wooden box, its edges worn smooth by years of handling. Her mother had warned her to guard it, saying it belonged to Eleanor Hart, the grandmother she never knew. The carvings hinted at English forest leaves, intertwined with strange symbols Martha couldn't identify. Inside rested a pressed herb, brittle but faintly fragrant, a scrap of cloth with dried brown stains, and a folded page that had traveled across 2 continents. The page was thin and fragile, its ink faded to a muted brown. At the top, a line written in Eleanor's trembling hand read, "Fear the judge who uses legends to justify cruelty." Below that was a fragment, supposedly from a Mongol manuscript, depicting a punishment meant to silence women accused of knowing too much. Martha never believed it truly came from Asia. The handwriting hinted at English origins, but she held it like a warning, a message passed down through generations of women who had been hunted for simply trying to heal. The box was her burden and her shield, and she kept it hidden, touching it only in the darkest moments of doubt. Then came the snowstorm, a night when the wind sobbed against shutters and trees groaned under the weight of ice. By dawn, 3 young girls were missing. Their footprints led halfway into the forest before vanishing beneath a sheet of broken snow. Panic ripped through the village like wildfire. Mothers collapsed in tears, fathers brandished muskets, and clergy declared the devil's hand unmistakable. When one girl stumbled back at dusk, freezing, delirious, and barely breathing, she whispered something that chilled everyone who heard it. Her eyes wide with terror, she muttered about a Mongol spirit of punishment walking in the woods, punishing disobedient children. The phrase spread instantly, mutating with each retelling. Some blamed foreign demons. Others claimed the spirit was summoned by a witch. Suspicions settled naturally upon Martha. She had treated the girls' fevers just days earlier, giving them warm drinks and herbs. That was enough. The villagers pointed, whispering that her knowledge was too strange, her calm too practiced. They said she carried the same darkness her grandmother had been accused of in England. And in a village starving for answers, accusation required no proof. Her arrest came before dawn. The constable and 2 ministers burst into her home, overturning shelves and rifling through chests as Martha stood trembling, clutching her shawl to her chest. In moments, they uncovered the carved box. They pried it open triumphantly, holding its contents up to the candlelight as if they had found a serpent coiled inside. The clergy examined the page with a mix of fear and satisfaction. "A spell," one whispered. "A foreign charm," murmured another. "A demon's scripture," declared the third. Judge Hathorne was summoned. His eyes gleamed as he read the warning line, twisting its meaning until it suited the narrative he needed. He spoke loudly enough for all present to hear. "This woman descends from the English witch who vanished in 1605. Her family has carried forbidden knowledge for generations." From that moment, Martha's fate was decided. Her trial became a grim mirror of Eleanor's suffering, as though the past reached into the present to reenact itself. She was forbidden to speak in her own defense. Silence was declared proof of guilt. She was locked in a frigid room without food for long stretches, the ministers praying outside her door as if coaxing a demon from her body. The townspeople watched her humiliation with an uneasy hunger, seeking reassurance that their fear had a shape, a face, a target. At night, Martha sat on the wooden floor, her breath leaving small clouds in the freezing air. She thought of Eleanor, of a woman she never met but felt tethered to, a forgotten figure swallowed by English darkness. She wondered if her grandmother had knelt like this, her voice stolen, her knowledge weaponized against her. Once during her trial, a minister asked if she had summoned the Asian spirit of punishment. Martha's laugh, hoarse and bitter, was interpreted as further evidence of guilt. The judges spoke her name with disdain, writing their own version of her life into the court records. And as the narrator of this old sorrow notes, 2 women, an ocean apart, punished by a law older than truth. A lie crafted by fearful men, carried across time, and used to break those who dared to heal. Cruelty does not die, it simply learns new faces. It sheds its skin, slipping from one century to the next, wearing the robes of religion one day and the mask of justice the next. It survives through men who crave authority, who need monsters to justify their power. And so the same darkness that crushed a woman in England rose again in the New World, unseen yet unchanged, an old lie dressed as ancient law. In the echoing silence of memory, 2 scenes unfold side by side. Eleanor kneels inside her iron confinement box, her breath shallow, her fingers numb. Every shift of her weight sends a jolt of pain through her cramped limbs. She whispers small, trembling prayers, sometimes to God, sometimes to the mother she once lost, sometimes to no one at all. Outside her box, angry men stomp through the jail corridor, their boots striking stone like war drums. Their voices rise in judgment, not justice. Across the ocean, and decades later, Martha curls on the floor of her wooden cell, shivering violently in the New England cold. She too prays, her words barely audible beneath the howling wind. She presses her forehead against the rough wooden wall, as if trying to reach back through time to the grandmother she never met. Footsteps echo outside, similar boots, similar anger, similar certainty that fear is righteousness. The truth binds them, despite all the talk of Mongol punishments. Neither woman's suffering had any root in real Mongol law. No such torture existed in the statutes of Genghis Khan or his successors. What England believed, what Salem repeated, was born from its own imagination, a forged cruelty given foreign shape to make it appear ancient, authoritative, undeniable. The legend had never been Asian. It had always been English. Elena's final dawn arrives under a sky smeared with grey. The village square is half buried in frost as officials drag her from the jail. Her legs buckle, but the soldiers haul her upright, their hands gripping her arms like iron clamps. Villagers gather in tight clusters, their breath rising like ghosts. The magistrate lifts the forged manuscript and declares that Elena confessed in silence, a twisted phrase meant to justify her death. Her execution is swift, quiet, and deliberately unrecorded. The clerk's quill hovers over the parchment, then retreats. A blank page is left in the village records, as if she never existed, as if her suffering belonged to no one. In Salem, Martha's punishment unfolds differently, but with the same vicious intent. She is bound and displayed in the meeting house, her wrists tied to a wooden beam above her head. The gathered townspeople hurl ash at her, ashes from hearths, from burnt offerings, even from the ground itself, each handful meant to stain her, mark her, silence her. Children cling to their mothers, watching with wide, fearful eyes. As the crowd disperses, an old woman, one no one recognizes, appears at the small window of the meeting house. Her face is lined, her eyes dark with knowing. She leans close to the wooden slats and whispers through them, her voice as soft as breath. "We were never witches, only women they feared." Then she vanishes into the falling snow, leaving Martha trembling with the sudden certainty that Elena had never truly left her. In England that same winter, the plague returns with merciless speed. The very men who tortured Elena, magistrates, constables, and clergy, begin to fall ill. Their throats swell, their skin bruises, their breath grows ragged. Within weeks, several are dead. Others flee the village, abandoning their sermons and proclamations. Mothers refuse to let them near their homes, muttering that they carry God's judgment. But those who remember whisper a darker truth. Elena's name had been stolen, and now the cost was being paid. In Salem, hysteria consumes itself. Even with Martha imprisoned, more children disappear, vanishing from locked rooms, guarded doorways, and crowded gatherings. Their footprints trail only a few steps before dissolving into the snow. The villagers begin to doubt. If the witch is already caught, why does the evil continue? One evening, as Martha lies unconscious from hunger, the minister's wife enters her cell searching for signs of possession. Among the straw, she discovers Elena's thin manuscript page, its edges worn from years of travel. She holds it up to the lantern, expecting to find symbols of witchcraft. Instead, she reads the warning Elena wrote long ago. "Fear the judge who uses legends to justify cruelty." The minister's wife's hands shake. She realizes the truth. The page was not a spell but a cry for mercy, a plea ignored across 2 generations. She folds it quickly and hides it beneath her cloak, fearing what the clergy would do if they found it. The end arrives quietly. Martha takes her final breath in the wooden cell, her body too weak to fight the cold any longer. No bells ring for her, no burial rites are spoken. She is lowered into the frozen ground beyond the village borders, her name unmarked. Snow covers her grave before sunrise. Across the ocean, Elena's daughter Anne grows old, clinging to her mother's memory. She tells the real story only in whispers, passing it to her children as though it were forbidden scripture. She insists that truth should survive even when records fail. She dies with Elena's herb pressed inside her Bible. Generations later, in a small house in America, one of Anne's distant descendants opens that same Bible, its pages cracking with age. Between 2 nearly crumbling sheets lies Elena's warning page, yellowed, soft, tremoring with time. The descendant reads the words, feeling an ache rise in her chest, sensing a history she barely understands, yet cannot ignore. She closes the Bible, holding it like something sacred, but the world outside remains silent, unchanged, unaware of the 2 women whose lives were stolen by a lie.